Today we are going to talk about ISO 14001-2015, which is Environmental Management Systems. This is the overview of today's content. And let us begin with discussing about what is Environmental Management System. Environmental Management System, or often called an EMS, is comprised of the policies, processes, plans, practices, and records that define the rules governing how your company interacts with the environment. This system needs to be tailored to your particular company because only your company will have the exact legal requirements and environmental interactions that match your specific business processes. However, the ISO 14000 requirements provide a framework and guidelines for creating your environmental management system so that you do not miss important elements needed for an EMS to be successful. The history of ISO 14001 reflects the ever-changing and growing expectations of consumers and citizens in relation to business environmental performance. Prior to the publication of the ISO 14001, the British Standards Institute published BS 7750 in response to a growing need by organizations that were being asked to demonstrate environmental credentials. BS 7750 laid the foundation for the initial version of ISO 14001, which was published in 1996. The initial ISO 14001 standards specified minimum requirements based on the organization's environmental policies and goals. Most attention was paid to pollution control and environmental management. The next version of the standard improved baseline requirements and included compliance criteria. Additionally, organizations had to distinguish between aspects they directly affect and those they may influence. Thus, organizations had to be change agents and supply chains improved. The current ISO 14001 standard uses a risk-based strategy to prioritize organizational risks and opportunities. When combined with minimum needs like compliance with regulations and pollution prevention, an organization develops a more complete environmental strategy and action plan. Let us go through the overview of ISO 14001-2015, which is the document that defines the requirements for the EMS and provides guidance for its use. It provides organizations with a framework to protect the environment and respond to changing conditions in line with socio-economic needs, ensuring desired environmental management outcomes. It is worth to be noted that ISO 14001 is applicable to any organization regardless of size, sector, or geographical location. The framework in the ISO 14001 can be used within a Plan, Do, Check, Act or PDCA approach for continuous improvement. So, what are the goals of this standard? First, it is to safeguard the environment by working to prevent or mitigate negative environmental impacts. Second, working to assist the organization in the attainment of compliance obligations. Third, strengthening environmental performance. Fourth, regulating or influencing the process of which your organization's products and services are designed, manufactured, distributed, consumed, and also disposed of. Fifth, attaining financial and operational benefits. And sixth, communicating environmental information to relevant interested parties. There are several terms that needed to be understood before applying ISO 14001. First are the terms related to organization and leadership, such as management system, environmental management system, environmental policy, organization, top management, and interested party. Next are terms related to planning, such as environment, environmental aspect, environmental condition, environmental impact, objective, environmental objective, prevention of pollution, requirement, compliance obligations, risk, and risks and opportunities. Third are terms related to support and operation, namely competence, documented information, life cycle, outsource, and process. Lastly are the terms related to performance evaluation and improvement, like audit, conformity, nonconformity, corrective action, continual improvement, effectiveness, indicator, monitoring, measurement, performance, and environmental performance. One might ask questions like, what are the differences between the term environmental management and environmental management system? In a nutshell, environmental management is a broader concept that encompasses all the activities and initiatives an organization undertakes to address environmental concerns. On the other hand, an EMS is a specific framework or structure implemented by an organization to systematically manage its environmental aspects in line with established standards and principles, such as ISO 14001. The EMS is a tool within the broader scope of environmental management, providing a structured and systematic approach to achieving environmental objectives and targets. The ISO 14001 requirements are separated into 10 different sections, or otherwise referred to as clauses. At the core of this ISO are the first 3 clauses that deal with the terms and definitions, the scope of the standard, and the standard's terms and definitions. There are no requirements in these 3 clauses, but they do provide a deeper understanding of the intent and the terminology used throughout the standard. There are then a further 7 clauses which do contain requirements. They are context of the organization, leadership, planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement. These clauses follow the Plan Do Check Act or PDCA management method. Based upon the requirements of ISO 14000-2015, an EMS is a structured, organized method for controlling and reducing the environmental impact of your business's operations and is a practical tool that helps organizations understand and manage their impacts on the environment. Therefore, the PDCA cycle is critical to the EMS operation. The PDCA cycle is recognized by ISO as an approved management methodology and is compulsory within the scope of ISO 14001. In the cycle, plan means identify or define the processes required and set appropriate scope and objectives. Do means implementing the processes, including responsibilities, resources, controls, and others. For check and act, it means monitoring, measuring, and evaluating performance in regards to environmental objectives, compliance obligations, control, and significant environmental aspects, and then take action based on the findings. Broadly speaking, clauses number 4, 5, and 6 are included in the plan stage. Clause number 7 and 8 are included on the do stage. Clause number 9 in the check stage, and clause number 10 in the act stage. In section 6 of ISO 14001-2015, we are specifically talking about aspect impacts. What is an environmental aspect? It is defined as an element of an organization's activities, products, or services that may impact or does impact the environment. Meanwhile, an environmental impact is a result of this environmental aspect. How to identify aspect and impacts? First, you need to know the environmental factors within the scope of your EMS. For example, your business serves drinks in a plastic cup. Second, you need to know the environmental aspects of that factor. For example, plastic containers that you use can pollute the ocean. Third, you need to know the environmental impacts of the identified aspects. For example, that plastic can harm ocean wildlife. When determining its environmental aspects, an organization can consider the emissions to air, releases to water, releases to land, use of raw materials and natural resources, generation of waste and/or byproducts, the use of energy, the use of space, and energy emitted, such as heat, radiation, and light. Talking about a more detailed steps of EMS aspect impact, first is of course the identification stage. The next stage is assessment or scoring of aspect impact, whether it is high, medium, or low. To do this assessment, we need to decide on a scoring system. It can involve variables such as severity, occurrence, and detection. There are things to consider in deciding the scoring system, such as the legislation, severity of environmental damage, interested parties, or quantity of waste type. Once a score of an aspect impact has been identified, an organization can develop a solution and assign specific objectives, targets, and programs to improve environmental performance. Moving on, there are various standards being used worldwide. However, EMAS and ISO 14001 are the main international references for the companies that aim to implement an EMS. EMAS and ISO 14001 share the same objective, to provide good environmental management. Yet, there are also some differences between the two. For example, ISO 14001 focuses on continual improvement of the management system. EMAS, on the other hand, focuses more on continual improvement of environmental performance. Management system here means the framework and the guideline itself. Meanwhile, environmental performance is an overall ecological impact of an economic activity. Second is about legal compliance. ISO 14001 emphasizes compliance with applicable legal requirements. However, it does not specifically require organizations to demonstrate legal compliance as a part of the standard. Meanwhile, EMAS goes further by requiring organizations to comply with all relevant legislations. EMAS registrants are obligated to conduct legal compliance assessments, and this information needs to be publicly available. Third, in terms of public participation and transparency, ISO 14001 does not specifically require organizations to engage in public participation or provide public disclosure of environmental performance data. Meanwhile, public participation is a distinctive feature of EMAS. Organizations must engage with the public and provide access to environmental information. The environmental statement produced under EMAS is made publicly available, promoting transparency and accountability. Next, in terms of auditing, ISO 14001 emphasizes continual improvement in environmental performance, but does not prescribe specific methodologies for improvement. Meanwhile, EMAS requires organizations to demonstrate continuous improvement in their environmental performance, and they must set quantifiable environmental objectives and targets. Lastly, in terms of certification and verification, ISO 14001 does not mandate external verification by third parties. Organizations can choose to undergo certification audits by independent certification bodies or ISO standards. Meanwhile, for EMAS, it requires third-party verification of the organization's environmental statement and compliance with legal requirements. This verification is typically conducted by accredited environmental verifiers. So, how to obtain ISO 14001 certification? Achieving ISO 14001 certification involves several key steps. First is to learn about the standard. You will need to understand ISO 14001 to help you know what you need to do in your organization to meet the requirements of the standard. Second is to perform an ISO 14001 environmental review and gap analysis to determine where you need to change your existing EMS. Third is to plan ISO 14001 project to determine your tasks, timeline, and resources. Fourth is to train the organization on ISO 14001. So your organization and all of your employees will need to be trained to work with the ISO 14001 EMS. Next is to design and document the ISO 14001 Environmental Management System. Design and document your ISO 14001 EMS, and the biggest portion of the project is to look at your current processes and redesigning them to address all of the requirements of the standard. Once you have modified or developed processes to meet the standard, you will need to control those processes. Documenting the processes as EMS system procedures is part of this control. Next is to use and improve your EMS. Once your system is developed and documented, employees will follow the procedures, collect records, and make improvements to the system. Next is to audit the EMS performance. Is it working? You will need to conduct internal audits to see how your system is working and find ways to improve it. And lastly, to achieve registration. Typically, you will select a registrar and they will come and perform your registration audit and then regular surveillance audits thereafter. How to perform an internal audit? The organization is required to establish, execute, and maintain an internal audit program outlining its frequency, methods, responsibilities, planning requirements, and reporting requirements to provide information on whether the EMS A. conforms to the organization's own requirements for its environmental management system and the requirements of the international standard ISO 14001, and B. whether the EMS is effectively implemented and maintained. First thing that an organization needs to do is to define the audit criteria and the scope for each audit. Second, to select auditors and conduct audits to ensure objectivity and the impartiality of the audit process. Third, is to ensure that the results of the audits are reported to relevant management. Why do we need to implement ISO 14001? What are the benefits? There are various advantages to an organization that applies ISO 14001. For example, it can improve the overall environmental performance and compliance. It can provide a framework for using pollution prevention practices to meet EMS objectives. It can increase the organization's efficiency and potential cost savings when managing environmental obligations. It can also promote predictability and consistency in managing environmental obligations. There will also be more effective targeting of scarce environmental management resources. It can also enhance public posture with outside stakeholders, enhance brand image as an eco-friendly company, and to facilitate access to the growing green market. Now, let us talk about ISO 14001 and ISO 14031. ISO 14001 and ISO 14031 are two related but distinct standards that address environmental management. ISO 14001 provides a framework for establishing and maintaining an environmental management system, while ISO 14031 provides guidelines on environmental performance evaluation. Integrating ISO 14031 into ISO 14000 involves incorporating environmental performance evaluation processes into the EMS. There are some cross-references between the two. For example, in ISO 14001 Clause 4.1 and ISO 14001 Clause 6.2.1. Both of these clauses mention ISO 14031. Another example is in ISO 14001 Clause 8.1 and 8.2, as well as ISO 14001 Clause 9. Again, these two clauses mention ISO 14031. How to successfully integrate ISO 14031 with ISO 14001. First, understand ISO 14031. Familiarize yourself with the requirements and guidelines. Second, identify relevant environmental aspects. Identify the environmental aspects and impacts of your organization's activities, products, or services. Third is to establish environmental objectives and targets. These should be measurable and aligned with the organization's environmental policy. Fourth, select and develop environmental performance indicators or EPIs. Choose appropriate environmental performance indicators that align with your environmental objectives. Fifth, integrate these EPIs into the EMS. Sixth, implement monitoring and measurement processes. Implement monitoring and measurement processes to regularly assess the identified environmental performance indicators. 7 is to review and evaluate performance. This periodical evaluation should include an assessment of the effectiveness of the EMS in achieving environmental evaluation. 8 is to take corrective action. Take corrective actions as necessary if the evaluation shows deviation from the objectives or targets. 9. Document the process. This documentation should include the selection of EPIs, monitoring and measurement processes, and the results of performance evaluations. Lastly is continual improvement. Emphasize the concepts of continual improvement by regularly reviewing the updating and the environmental performance evaluation processes as part of the overall EMS. By following these steps, organizations can effectively integrate ISO 14031 into their ISO 14001, promoting a comprehensive approach to environmental management and performance evaluation.